unfoldment here for the whole world. It's very rare that the world is so captivated by one story. And in a way, we have people going missing and women murdered all of the time. This has just struck a chord with the collective. Mostly, I think, because she was so visible on social media, and upon her passing, all of her social media visibility was resurrected for us to watch over and over again and feel like we actually lost someone we know. Now, the interesting thing with astrology is it doesn't just say, oh, look, you could be murdered or die because of your primary love relationship. Who would tell that to anybody in a chart reading? But it shows that there's something like a death that could potentially happen, and violence in the context of being in a relationship with somebody like a marriage partner or a fiance. And I think that that's something we have to actually acknowledge about astrology, that it really does tell us true sky stories. And yet at the time that she was actually killed, the day on the 27th, perhaps the latest speculation is the last time she was alive was probably the 27th of August, after there was a fight with her fiance with the staff at a restaurant, and they left, and she was crying, and after that she never got in touch with her family. Nothing else happened. So the sky around the 27th, 28th, and 9th of August has some interesting factors relative to the sky and her chart that also feel like a story of some magnitude beyond a personal narrative. Like, she's dying, but when we think about she died, when we think about our history here, there are pivotal deaths that changed the course of humanity's story, right? The crucifixion, apparently, of Jesus Christ, right? It's just one example. The death of JFK by assassination. So sometimes something just sparks like into the collective field. There's so many of these stories where someone's passing can be a huge shift for humanity in some way. Or, the thousands of people who died in the 9/11 trade tower episode. So I'm going to grab her chart, and with great respect for her family, I'm only doing this. Okay, so Gabby was born March 19th, 1999. That's public domain knowledge, Blue Point, New York. I didn't know what time she was born. I adjusted the chart a few times, and I looked at some astrologers on Reddit to see what they were thinking as well. I decided at the longer term arc of the whole thing that it's just so hard to rectify a natal chart based on speculation without any knowledge of even the time of day she was born. So this chart does not reflect the houses in which these planets truly sit, but it does reflect a good deal of possible truths about Gabby. In this chart, she happens to be a Leo rising with the Vestal flame on Leo. On the ascendant, could very much look like somebody who's very willing to put their face in the public and be a performer, and to step out into the world, and show themselves on social media the way she did. So one of the things I wanted to say is that when you have Pluto, the god of death, touching anything in a natal chart, you want to pay attention to that little story of what Pluto, the god of death, is doing. Now, in Gabby's chart, I'm going to put my cursor on Pluto for anyone who doesn't know astrology glyphs. It does look like this red symbol of a ball within a chalice with a cross beneath it. This symbol of Pluto in her 5th house is simply something that could mean in her life that she'll have challenges in romance. She'll have death and rebirth transformations around children, bearing children possibly, because it's the house of children, but also the house of romantic love affairs. And Pluto alone sitting there would also just maybe predict people will have super intense love affairs and sex partners. But what caught my eye when I looked at her chart was how she has Juno, the goddess of marriage, sitting there as well. And as many of you may know, Brian Laundrie was her fiance, and they were supposedly engaged to be married. And Juno is about that level of a commitment within love, in the context of love. So you could always look at this chart, therefore, not even knowing if it's a 5th house Pluto. See, that's my speculation based on trying to line her chart up to look like what she seemed to be doing in the public eye. But even if I didn't know where this fit, where the goddess of committed love stories and significant relationships set with Pluto, it could be in any other part of her chart, I would still be able to say that there's a strong possibility that this person is at risk of death or harm or super intense, toxic, difficult, and abusive situations with their marriage partner. And believe it or not, I cannot count the times I've been with women who have had abusive marriages, emotionally and physically, who have some contact between Juno and Pluto in their natal chart in my client base. Often it's really just what it seems. The god of the underworld abducted Persephone and took her and raped her. It is a god that is known for really, really bad behavior. So with Pluto sitting there, god of the underworld, with Juno, there's something about that inner chart that made me concerned, that this was a foretold story. And then when I looked at some of the other elements, which I'm about to share with you, it fortified that as well. So I'm going to share solar arcs, and I'm going to share the transit chart. The transit will be set for August 27th, the day that she died, or the 28th, 29th. It's the same time frame that there's police believe she passed away. The 27th was the fight at the restaurant. And then Brian, her fiance, was back home by September 1st. And so in that window of time, something happened to her. The other thing I'd say is the solar arc time that I'm about to show as well, I hope I remembered the details correctly, I drew this a few days ago, is symbolic time, whereas transits are real lifetime. So keep that in mind, but solar arc time is like a clock that's ticking along in a certain rhythm, called it a year, roughly a year for each degree a planet moves forward from the time of birth. And there was something I saw in her solar arc chart that was pretty interesting. And honestly, because I did this chart a while ago, I think it was Mars solar arcing to the Pluto. So let's grab the solar arc first and look at the symbolic time. I will need to recast her chart. And you'll be surprised in your own lives if you look at what's called solar arc directions, how accurate it is in terms of showing you significant turning points in your life based on a symbolic sky. I'm just waiting for my chart to say Mercury retrograde is really retrograde. Software is acting really strange. I think it worked. Okay. Okay, go away. And let's put the second chart up. We'll put Gabby in the middle, and we'll put solar arcs on the outside. Okay. So you can see that what was happening in her life during September. I've got it set for September 28th, but the idea is late September. In these outside ring of planets that have been marching along through her chart since the moment she was born. For instance, she was born with Mars in Scorpio in the 4th house, or not, because I don't know for sure what house she's in. Mars in Scorpio is drawn to the dark, the mysterious, the occult, the supernatural, the taboo. It's about intensity. It's about all Mars things, of course, like travel and trips and adventures as well. And, that Mars has moved forward from its 12-degree Scorpio position to finally catch up over here with the planets in this part of the chart, which may or may not be her 5th house. Now, Mars is a god of endings, cutting, severing. Mars is swords, violence, accidents, conflict, aggression. Mars has come into contact with what is a stellium of planets in the part of the chart that made me concerned about marriage and death. And where Mars is connecting most strongly is the beginning of this energy of the stellium, which is Cupido, the god of passion. This is a trans-Neptunian symbol here. It is a hypothetical planet, but it represents a lot of things, but one is the impulse for eroticism and passion, just like Cupid's arrow, passion, Cupido, and the wounded healer, Chiron. So Mars connecting with passion and woundedness in proximity to death and marriage made me think that this was literally a very perilous time that she was going through. And clearly that would be perilous for a while Mars was still in the orb of Cupido and Chiron. And technically in the timing of this chart, Mars would have been exactly conjunct, let's say, Cupido, the beginning of that story, about 6 or 7 months ago. Alrighty, and coming into contact with Chiron about 4 months before she died. And it was in July they launched their trip. So it was just building for that trip that there was this Martian energy at the bottom, with this stellium here. Let me see what else I noticed before, because it's been a while since I looked. It's funny, sometimes we always get misunderstandings about Jupiter. Like Jupiter is the god of good luck, expansion, and growth. I can't count the times I've seen Jupiter kill somebody, but usually there's a bigger purpose and meaning to it. For instance, a blessed ending because somebody is ill and suffering, or in this case, what may be happening with Gabby Petito, her family's created the Gabby Petito Foundation. They announced it in a conference today. They want to start serving the greater good of lost people and the lack of interest in finding everybody who's gone missing. And so they're going to lead a new charge of justice for that. And Jupiter is a god of justice. And I just found it interesting that Jupiter has just entered a new territory, 0 degrees of Taurus, in her natal chart, in the high noon of her natal chart, the public reputation and status, and coming into contact with Venus, which is indignity there. Venus, I like Venus in the 10th house. I put this house here because she was becoming a starlet. She was trying to create a social media following. Venus and Taurus in the 10th house can look like that. We don't know how it would have gone had she lived, how far she could have gone with that. But even if Jupiter's not in the 10th house, I'm always acknowledging I don't know her time of birth. And all I can say is that Jupiter was coming into proximity to Venus in a new, fresh place in the chart. And Jupiter on Venus is part of the timing of her passing. I'm not sure how I might interpret that, but I could say that Jupiter brings blessings in endings, as well as blessings in beginnings. So bigger narrative in the story here somehow. And the last thing I think I'll say about this chart, this particular version of things, is that she was born with the Vestal flame on her ascendant, if she's born when I think she is. But if she's not, she just has a Vestal flame in her chart. That's all I can say. She's, we all do, but she's got it in Leo, which is courage, performing, shining brightly. Actors are very leonine, and the Vestal flame is something you want to spark a devotion to or dedication to, or shine a light or a torch in some way. I just find it interesting that leonine Vestal flame was getting ready to transit into a new place in her chart. And these are subtle shifts, right? I mean, literally in about 6 months from her death, you'll see that Vestal flame move into Virgo. And I would love to see what happens when that happens in terms of what the Gabby Petito Foundation does, or what a court case becomes, because it's somehow a part of her story that's getting ready to take a new turn and go into a new direction. And, when she was born, when she was born, Mercury is conjunct her sun. And that's a very, very, very special Mercury, okay? It's not just a Mercury conjunct her sun, it's a Mercury cazimi in the heart of the sun. It's like a very powerful, special Mercury, the messenger of the gods, deeply embedded in this chart in the 8th house of death, because I think I'm getting a close approximation of her birth chart. But even without that, Mercury in the heart of the sun is going to do something special. It's going to be a grand announcer, a grand messenger, conscripted for the greater good, for the collective, for God, for soul, for divine will. And that is where that Vestal flame will go in about 6 months, into Mercury's house. And, this can look like, especially in Virgo, things that are written, like the family's writing a story or a book is written, but it's going to take her story into a whole other area in which this Mercury, she was born with this Mercury to become a big voice for the world. And the reason I'm talking about it, the Vestal flame is going into Mercury's house, right? The 2nd house, Virgo, or if it's not a 2nd house, just into the sign of Virgo. So we kind of get a feeling here that after her passing, a lot of things are changing. And one of them is there's going to be a light, a shining torch, a beacon of light, like a Statue of Liberty in the sign of Virgo that was based on her chart, as if she's still alive. Her soul is still alive, moving forward to shine some kind of beacon of light in a very profound way, because Mercury in her chart is conjunct that sun in cazimi in a very exalted, holy, special way. So what comes of her death may be actually quite amazing. What happens after this could be game-changing. So we will see what the universe has conspired and why this has happened, so that we can have what I would say is great social change of some significance, legal and justice changes of some significance. A lot of talk goes on about the police officer who had the video cam, who stopped her and her boyfriend after he was spotted slapping and hitting her, and how he managed to turn the story around to be that he was the victim, and she collided and collaborated with that by being, willing to take it on. That's a classic abuse dynamic. where the abused one will take the blame, and because they're afraid of the wrath of the abuser. So she may have been in that situation where that dynamic had been embedded within the relationship, where she was hiding his bad behavior from the outer world. And the police officer wasn't trained to spot that, and fell into this sort of the narcissist spell of maybe what he might be as a narcissist, who knows. And, maybe there'll be change in education for police officers. There is education, but more rigorous education, encountering situations of battering or abuse, and having to intercede and know what they're dealing with. And that alone would be a gift from her death. So the other chart I want to bring up is the transit chart on the time of her death. And one of the interesting things about August 27th, or the 28th, is going to be the same, is some of the way the sky is lined up at that time. So let me pull that into her chart. The transits, okay. I don't really want October, so I'll just change that back a bit. All right, so I'll go over the 27th, but it will be the same on the 28th and the 29th. So what I'm about to say applies. So one of the things I found interesting about the time of the day, like the day that this happened, maybe the 27th, 28th, 29th are all the same chart, more or less, is that Juno, the goddess of marriage, on the south node, loss, endings, releasing, surrender, difficulty. Those two are traveling together in Sagittarius on that day. And in fact, Juno will be there for all the way till November, mid-November. So this is a long story, but they're going through that part of the chart. And Juno, the goddess of marriage and commitment, thus fiance and engagements and stuff like that, is literally you can't tell, but this is 9 degrees and 57 minutes, which is to say it's a 10-degree Juno. Pluto is sitting at 10 degrees, the god of death. This is the god of marriage. This is the south node of loss, release, surrender, difficulty. And this is literally like the pouring out. And this is the goddess of marriage in the sky, who takes approximately 5 years to come back here, guys. So it's only every 5 years that you're going to see this kind of sky for Gabby. It's not going to, like, if she was still alive, we'd be talking about this five and a half years later. So the goddess of marriage on the god of death next to her own Juno. Now, in a real life chart, if I was looking at your chart and we have a Juno return, Juno coming back to Juno, it can mean an end of a relationship, a divorce, a separation, an ending. If you're single, it can be the beginning of a relationship. Because she was with him, she was my client, I'd be saying, oh, there could be a dramatic ending in your current relationship with your fiance. God of death, it'll be very intense. Would I have said your fiance might murder you? Of course not. But I would have predicted for this woman a very difficult time, okay, in the end of August, as Juno was in proximity here to Pluto and to Juno herself. Juno returned to Juno every 5.5 years. Forget the 7-year itch. It's a 5-year itch in most relationships. The other thing what else did I see in here? Oh, the sky. So I'm intrigued by a couple of other elements that are showing up in the sky at the time of her birth. And one is an asteroid. Let me grab my back end chart again, where I was looking at that asteroid. Bum, bum, bum. I would have printed that out. It would have been easier, actually. Okay, yeah. So that on the day of her death, in the sky, Mercury was sitting with a star called Alcade. Alcade. Now let's remember how important Mercury is to her. I'm not sure if I lost you. Let's not forget how important Mercury is to her. Mercury is in the heart of the sun when she was born. So anything going on with sky Mercury has importance to her soul. So sky Mercury was conjunct the star Alcade. It's the star of female mourners, and it is the star that represents mass sorrow. Now that Mercury in the sky on the day of her death was at 26 degrees of the sign of Virgo in dignity, against the star of mass sorrow, calamity, events that cause mass sorrow. When she was born, her Mercury was at 28 degrees. This is called a Mercury opposition. It happens to us quite often. I mean, Mercury goes around the sky quickly. But the point of this is that the Mercury in the sky against the star in the sky of female mourners and mass sorrow was triggering her natal Mercury in the heart of the sun. At the same time, the sky nodes, the north node at 6 degrees of the sign of Gemini, was almost perfectly conjunct the asteroid Persephone. And it's Persephone who's abducted, raped, taken to the underworld by Pluto, who made her his wife. Okay, she became queen of the underworld. So it really is like a husband and wife story, but before they're husband and wife. So there's an abduction, there's a rape, there's a violence, there's a transgression story on that north node at 6 degrees of Gemini. But why does that matter? Does it, like, so what, right? Does it really, who cares, Well, I find that interesting because that north node, south node dynamic is going right through the middle of this death by marriage partner, wounded healer, passion stellium, which may or may not be in her 5th house. So the day she died, the north node was there. Would it be there the next day and the next day? Yes. It'll be there for about 3 days, 4 days on either side. With the asteroid's moving along pretty close to the north node, but at a different pace, so that they will separate eventually. So when I think about the Persephone myth and, the sense of, the innocence of Persephone, she was like a maiden, she was a virgin, she was picking daisies in a field or some sort of flower, and she was abducted and raped. Also in the Persephone myth, the mother goes under the earth, into the underworld to reclaim her daughter. The mother of Persephone is the asteroid Demeter or Ceres, the same goddess that's sitting up here with Persephone in the north node. It will likely be the mother of Gabby Petito or the mothers of the world, who then reclaim the daughter. I'm going to cry. It's like a really sad story. Who reclaim the daughter from the underworld. And I just watched the family on TV. So, but the reclaiming of the daughter from the underworld isn't like you can bring her back from the dead, but you can bring back her memory from the dead by doing something important. It was today they declared that they created a foundation in her name. Oh, because I'm going to cry on YouTube now. So the thing is that this story is just really, really, really powerful. It's archetypally rich. It's super potent. It's more is going on than meets the eye. When she died, it's a little bit like, there's almost a soul that decided to be a martyr for something greater. Okay, that's how I'm going to interpret that. I feel that's true. The last thing I want to say before we take questions is this. This is just her plain old natal chart, and this is the sky when she was born. And what I'm seeing here